There is a moment, subtle, invisible to the eyes, when everything external becomes quiet. The world slows down, the distractions begin to dissolve. And in that stillness, something ancient and pure begins to rise. This is not the silence of boredom or escape. It is the silence of alignment, a sacred pause. The very moment the body goes silent, the soul begins to speak. But we live in a time where noise is constant. Noise in our minds, noise in our environments, noise in our desires. We are fed with stimulation from the moment we wake up to the moment we sleep. And so we forget what it means to truly listen. Have you ever wondered why, after giving in to every impulse, we still feel hollow? Why, after chasing pleasure, there's a deeper ache that remains untouched? It is because we are not listening to the soul. We are satisfying the body, but starving the essence. Abstinence is not about punishment. It is not about shame. It is not about fear. It is about power. It is about reclaiming the sacred energy that we carelessly waste, day after day, on things that do not nourish us. It is about remembering that you are not your cravings. You are not your impulses. You are the observer behind them. The silent awareness that watches, learns, and grows. To abstain from overconsumption, from mindless desire, from shallow pleasures, is to light a fire inside you. Not a fire that burns outward, but one that burns through your illusions. One that clears the fog and reveals something deeper. The truth. In that silence, when the body's urges quiet down, when the hands are not reaching, the mouth is not speaking, the eyes are not consuming, the soul, which has waited patiently, begins to rise. And it speaks not in words, but in knowing, in intuition, in purpose, in alignment. The world may tell you that to abstain is to miss out, but I will tell you this. The greatest treasures are found in the space most people run from, in the silence, in the emptiness, in the pause. That is where transformation begins. It is in restraint that we find true freedom, because only then do you see what truly holds power over you. Only then do you begin to choose, instead of react. Only then does your will become stronger than your habit. You will never hear the whisper of the soul when the body is screaming, and the body screams every time it is addicted, every time it is overstimulated, every time it is led by impulse instead of wisdom. So sit, breathe, disconnect, be still, let the hunger rise, let the discomfort speak, and instead of running from it, listen. There is a message waiting inside that longing. A message only silence can deliver. You are not here to live on the surface. You are here to dive deep, to master yourself, to discipline the body so the soul can lead. When the body goes silent, the soul speaks. And what it says will not just change your life. It will awaken the life that was waiting all along. There is a place within you that is older than thought and deeper than emotion. It does not shout, it does not rush, and it never forces its presence. It waits patiently. Through the noise, through the chaos, through the years you spend looking outward, it waits. That place is your awareness, the watcher behind the thoughts, the stillness behind the movement, the silence behind every sound. And silence is not emptiness. Silence is not a void. It is the birthplace of awareness. Most people fear silence because it exposes everything they have been running from. When you remove the background noise of daily life, the music always playing, the constant scrolling, the unnecessary conversations, the endless mental chatter, something strange begins to happen. You start to feel what you've been avoiding. You start to hear the voice you've been drowning. And it isn't always comfortable. In fact, it almost never is, at first. Because silence shows you the truth. Not the filtered truth you post for others. Not the story you tell yourself. The real truth. And in that truth lies power. The kind of power that does not need to shout or perform. The kind that simply is. Imagine a lake during a storm, wind tearing across the surface, waves crashing wildly. Nothing is clear. That's how most people live. Constant movement, constant disturbance, and then without warning the storm stops, the wind dies, the lake stills, and suddenly you can see all the way to the bottom. That is what happens when the mind becomes quiet. That is what happens when the body is no longer led by impulse, but guided by stillness. The surface clears, the truth appears. I remember being told to sit still as a child, and how impossible it felt. My legs twitched, my mind ran, my breath was shallow. Stillness felt unnatural, but only because everything around me was teaching movement faster, louder, more. The world doesn't teach us silence, it teaches distraction. But I realized, years later, that silence is not something you must go find in a cave or a monastery. Silence is already within you. You just have to stop running from it. There came a time in my own journey where I reached a point of exhaustion. Not from work, not from the body, but from the weight of always being on, always reacting, always proving. And no matter how much I gained, There was a quiet echo inside that said, "This isn't it." I tried to silence it with more action, more achievements, more motion, but it only grew louder in the quiet of the night. Until I stopped. Not because I was enlightened, but because I was tired. I unplugged, I fasted, I stayed away from the noise, and what came up was uncomfortable. Doubt, fear, regret, confusion. But behind all of that, something even more surprising came: clarity. Not the kind of clarity that comes from thinking harder. The kind that comes when you don't think at all, when you simply are. That's when I learned the most important lesson. Your awareness is always there. Beneath the noise, beneath the craving, beneath the performance. It is watching. It does not judge. It does not panic. It simply sees. And the more you return to that awareness, the more you begin to live from it. Not as an idea, but as your natural state. What most people call emptiness is not empty at all. It is the most alive, the most present, and the most honest space you can enter. And yet, it terrifies people. Why? Because it takes away the masks. It removes the distractions. You can no longer hide. And strangely, when you can no longer hide from yourself, that is when you truly begin to live. Silence is a mirror. It reflects exactly what is there. No filters, no lies. And when you face that reflection, something incredible happens. The fear begins to dissolve. The confusion turns into direction. And you begin to see not with your eyes, but with your awareness. The kind of seeing that changes you, that cuts through illusion, that reminds you of who you were before the world told you who to be. There was a day when I sat, just breathing, doing nothing else. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then more. And during that stillness, an image came to me, a candle in a windless room. The flame no longer flickering, just steady. That's what the mind becomes in silence. Steady, bright, undisturbed. And from that steadiness, everything becomes clear. What you truly want, what no longer serves you, who you are when no one is watching. We often think we need more in order to grow. More information, more guidance, more steps. But sometimes what we truly need is less. Less noise, less movement, less chasing. So that what is already within us has the space to rise. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who sees them. You are not your urges. You are the one who notices them. And when you remember this, not just mentally but experientially, a deep peace sets in. The kind of peace the world cannot give or take away. A peace that comes from being aligned with your own presence. You do not find yourself by adding more. You find yourself by letting go. You do not awaken through noise. You awaken through stillness. And it begins the moment you allow the body to go silent. Because when the body goes silent, the soul does not whisper. The soul speaks. There is a common illusion in the modern world. It whispers that freedom comes from doing whatever you want whenever you want. That real strength is found in indulgence, in taking without pause, in satisfying every craving. But what if I told you the opposite is true? What if strength isn't found in how much you can take, but in how much you can hold back? We live in a world that praises the loud, the excessive, the overdone. From food to pleasure, from entertainment to opinions, everything is louder, faster, and more addictive. Yet behind all this consumption, we are getting weaker. Not in muscle, in mind, in spirit, in will. You see, indulgence is easy. It takes nothing but a yes. But discipline is the moment you stand at the edge of desire and say no. Not because you're afraid, but because you are free. Free from the chains of impulse. Free from being controlled by fleeting emotions. Free from the lie that your body is the master and your spirit the slave. I once watched a man train for years in the mountains. Every morning before sunrise, he would rise and repeat the same routine: breath work, meditation, stretching, movement. He ate only what he needed, slept with the sun, never once complained. People asked him why he deprived himself of all the pleasures of life. He smiled and said, "I do not deprive myself, I prepare myself for life, for truth, for power." And when I looked in his eyes, I understood. There was a stillness there, a sharpness, a presence that no indulgence could ever give you. Because true strength doesn't come from feeding the body more, it comes from taming it, mastering it. And when you master the body, the mind begins to follow. And when the mind is still, you are unshakable. There is nothing more terrifying to a weak man than his own desires. He fears his hunger, he fears his craving, because he knows deep down that he is not in control. He will fall the moment the temptation is strong enough, and so he avoids the test. He hides behind comfort. But there comes a time when a man must face himself, not in front of others, in silence, alone. And it is there that his real strength is revealed or his weakness exposed. Discipline is the path that no one applauds in the beginning. It is lonely, it is silent. No crowd cheers when you wake before the sun. No one claps when you walk away from temptation, but something extraordinary happens in the dark. Every time you say no to what weakens you, you say yes to what strengthens you, and that yes builds something inside you that cannot be bought, borrowed or faked. Character. Let me tell you something most people won't. You will not find your purpose in indulgence. You will not discover your strength in comfort. The fire that forges greatness does not burn in places of ease. It burns in restraint. It burns in patience. It burns in the quiet suffering that discipline demands and that the soul rewards. When you delay pleasure, you deepen presence. When you resist the easy path, you prepare for the hard one. And life will test you, not once, not in theory, in reality. You will be tempted, you will be pushed, you will be tired. And in those moments, what will save you is not your talent. It is not your charm. It is not your intelligence. It is your discipline. The man who can control his body is stronger than the man who can lift 1,000 pounds. The woman who can quiet her mind is braver than one who can conquer nations. Because they are not owned by what surrounds them, they are led by something deeper. A flame inside that does not flicker with the winds of emotion or fear. Discipline is not rigid. It is not about becoming a machine. It is about becoming alive, fully awake, aware of what you allow in and what you keep out. It is about choosing your path, not being dragged by it. And in this choice, there is peace. There will be moments when you feel the urge to quit, to give in, to take the easier way. That is not weakness. That is the test. And when that moment comes, breathe, step back. Remember that every time you overcome that moment, you are not just training your body, you are sharpening your soul. No one sees the inner battles you fight. No one knows how many temptations you've turned away. But the silence knows, your soul knows, and it records every moment of strength, every decision to stay the course. One day, when others are broken by the very things you have mastered, you will walk with calm. Not because the storm didn't come, but because you built yourself to endure it. The body wants comfort, the mind wants control, but the soul wants growth. And growth only comes when you choose to hold yourself back from what is easy and walk toward what is true. True strength is quiet. It is not the roar of indulgence. It is the silence of control, the stillness of presence, the fire that burns inward. And the moment you stop feeding your weakness, your strength will finally have the space to rise. People often misunderstand what abstinence truly is. They imagine it as emptiness, as lack, as denial. They associate it with suffering, with punishment, with loss, but they are only seeing the surface. What if abstinence is not about turning away from life, but about turning towards something far deeper? What if, in letting go of excess, you actually begin to return, not to a version of yourself shaped by the world, but to your original essence? We are not born addicted. We are not born distracted. We are not born dependent. We arrive in this world whole, alert, sensitive. But somewhere along the way we begin to collect things, opinions, habits, desires that are not our own. We're taught that to be happy we must always add more pleasure, more attention, more approval. But the more we add, the more distant we grow from our center. Abstinence is not a rejection of life. It is a rediscovery of life's purity. It is an invitation to return to the self that existed before the noise. To return to the body, not as a tool of indulgence, but as a vessel of energy. To return to the mind, not as a storage of worries and plans, but as a space for clarity. To return to the soul, not as an abstract idea, but as a living, breathing truth within you. There was a time when I walked into solitude for 7 days. No food, no phone, no conversations, no distractions, just a mat, water, and the sky above. The first day felt like dying. My thoughts roared. My body screamed. The craving was loud for stimulation, for movement, for taste. But by the third day, something changed. My hunger transformed into awareness. My mind began to settle. And on the 5th night I felt it, not just peace, but presence. A depth I had forgotten was possible. I wasn't empty, I was full of breath, of stillness, of connection, not to the world, but to myself. That is the gift of abstinence, not the act of going without, but the experience of going within. We mistake craving for living, but craving is noise. Real living is when you can sit with nothing, no distractions, no food, no praise, and still feel whole. Real living is when your sense of self is not dependent on what you consume but on what you are. When you practice abstinence, even briefly, you begin to remember that every external desire is a pointer, not to the thing itself, but to something deeper. You don't really want the food, the screen, the thrill. You want the feeling you believe it brings. But what if you could feel that without reaching outward? What if joy, strength, peace, clarity, all of it was already within you, waiting beneath the layers of excess? Letting go is not loss, it is returning. I've watched many people fear the silence that comes when they stop chasing. They panic in the stillness, but that fear is only the withdrawal from illusion. It's the discomfort of the ego losing control. And that's exactly where the transformation begins. Because when the false layers fall away, the truth of who you are, untouched, unmoved, unshaken, begins to emerge. We don't practice abstinence to become less. We do it to remember that we were never lacking to begin with. Think of firewood. You don't light it by adding more logs constantly. You light it by creating space, by allowing air, by striking a spark. The same is true with the soul. You don't awaken it by cramming it with constant input. You awaken it by stepping back, by creating stillness, by removing what suffocates its flame. Abstinence is that space, that breath, that return. And from that return comes clarity. The kind that tells you which desires are genuine and which are implanted. The kind that shows you what is real and what is just noise. The kind that makes your next move feel clean, aligned, and powerful, not because it was forced, but because it came from your core. You begin to see life not through the lens of appetite, but through awareness. You eat not to numb, but to nourish. You speak not to fill silence, but to share truth. You move not to escape stillness, but to express it. Every action becomes sacred when it comes from essence. Abstinence is not a prison. It is a path. A way to walk back through the tangled branches of distraction and return to the clearing, to the space inside you that needs no stimulation to be full, to the place that remembers who you were before you became what the world told you to be. There is a certain radiance that only comes from those who have tasted abstinence and found strength in it. Not weakness, not longing, but freedom. The eyes of someone who has sat with their own hunger and discovered that their spirit is stronger. The presence of someone who has faced emptiness and realized that it was never empty at all. It was alive, pure, sacred. You do not have to go away to find yourself. You only have to stop running, stop chasing, stop grasping, and start listening. The deeper truth is already speaking underneath the noise, beneath the cravings. The path is not forward. The path is inward. So when you choose abstinence, know this. You are not punishing yourself. You are honoring yourself. You are not walking away from joy. You are walking back to a joy that is no longer dependent on anything outside of you. A joy that is still and strong and real. Because in abstinence, you do not become less, you become whole. There is a voice inside every human being that most will never hear, not because it is silent, but because the noise of the body is too loud. It is not the voice that wants food or pleasure or approval. It is not the voice that complains or worries or demands. It is much older, much wiser, and much more still. It is the voice of the soul. And that voice speaks in quiet moments, not to the ears, but to the heart. But how can one hear a whisper if they are surrounded by thunder? From the moment we wake, our bodies begin to make noise. Hunger, stiffness, desires, and then comes the noise of the mind. Thoughts, plans, doubts, fears. We are consumed by a storm before we even leave the bed. And so the day begins, not from presence, but from reaction. We run toward things, we run away from others, and in all that motion, in all that noise, we miss the most important message of all, the one that rises only in stillness. You cannot hear the soul when the body is always asking to be fed, not just with food, but with attention, with pleasure, with distraction, and the more you give it, the more it demands. But if you pause, truly pause, something magical happens. The body's noise begins to settle, the waves become still, the cravings fade, and in that space, the soul begins to speak. I remember a time when I felt lost, not because my life lacked direction, but because it lacked depth. I had goals, structure, even success, but something was missing, something I couldn't name. Every time I was alone, I reached for something, a phone, a snack, a thought. I was afraid of silence. I feared what would surface if I gave it space. And then, one evening, I didn't reach. I just sat. At first, the noise inside me got louder. The body complained, the mind raced, but I stayed. I breathed, I listened, and eventually the noise slowed. Beneath it, something else emerged. A presence, a knowing, a soft voice that said, "You are not lost. You are just buried beneath noise." That moment changed everything. The voice of the soul is not dramatic. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't shout over your thoughts. It waits for you to quiet down, to stop chasing, to return. And when you do, its guidance is unlike anything else. Calm, clear, beyond logic, yet always true. We often believe that the answers we seek are outside of us. In books, in teachers, in experiences. But those are only mirrors. They can reflect, but they cannot replace. The soul already knows what you need. already holds your deepest truth. The question is not whether the soul speaks, the question is whether you're still enough to hear it. And that stillness requires courage. Because when you begin to silence the body, you will first encounter everything it's been hiding. Old fears, unfinished pain, uncomfortable truths. And the temptation will be to run, to move, to distract yourself once again. But if you stay, if you breathe through the discomfort, the noise begins to break apart, and the silence that follows is not empty, it is sacred. That silence is where insight lives, where clarity is born, where the soul's voice becomes not just a whisper but a force, a direction, a light. I have seen people change not from effort but from silence, not from pushing harder but from listening deeper. Because transformation does not come from more activity, it comes from connection to something higher, something within. That connection is the soul speaking, and the body, when quiet, becomes its perfect receiver. When a musician plays an instrument, it must be tuned. If the strings are too loose, the sound is flat, too tight, and it snaps. Your body is the same. If it is overstimulated, it cannot receive. If it is undernourished, it cannot sustain. But when it is balanced, not silenced by force, but quieted by discipline, it becomes a vessel for truth. And what you begin to hear in that state is nothing short of revelation. You begin to remember what matters, what is real, what is calling you. The doubts lose their grip, the noise of the world loses its importance. And for the first time, you feel anchored, not by control, but by trust. Trust in your own being. Trust that the guidance you've been seeking has been waiting patiently within you. The soul does not speak in the language of the world. It speaks in feeling, in presence, in certainty that arrives without explanation. And when it speaks, it brings with it a peace that no success, no pleasure, no approval can replicate. But to reach it, you must be willing to let the body go quiet. This is why fasting, silence, stillness, solitude, all these ancient practices exist. Not to torture the body, not to punish the self, but to allow space, to open the channel, to remember the language of the soul. You do not need more to awaken, you need less. Less noise, less urgency, less reaching outward. You need space, breath, simplicity. Because only when the body goes silent can the soul finally speak in full voice. And what it speaks is not ordinary. It is not limited by fear. It is not shaped by the past. It is pure. It is wise. It is you before the world told you who to be. So slow down, step back, turn inward, let the noise fade. The world will wait. But your soul, it has waited long enough. When the body goes silent and the soul begins to speak, you no longer walk through life guessing who you are. You know. You no longer chase things to feel complete. You remember that you already are. In this stillness, in this quiet, in this sacred return to yourself. You stop living by accident and begin living with intention. The noise of the body, the distractions of the world, they fade into the background like echoes in a forgotten hall. What remains is essence. What remains is truth. And truth, once remembered, changes everything. You see, the world outside you will always try to tell you what matters. It will scream at you to buy more, consume more, achieve more, compare more. But the soul whispers something different. It says you are already enough. You are already whole. And every time you strip away another layer of noise, another mask, another dependency, you get closer to that truth. We are not here merely to exist. We are here to awaken. And the path to awakening does not run through indulgence. It flows through discipline, through silence, through sacrifice, through the sacred art of saying no to the things that weaken you, so you can say yes to the things that raise you. It is easy to follow the crowd, easy to live on autopilot, but there is no power in that. There is no fire in that. True greatness lives in the quiet decisions you make when no one is watching. When you choose presence over pleasure, focus over distraction, purpose over comfort. Remember this, the strongest people you will ever meet are not those who had everything. They are the ones who gave things up, who chose the higher path even when it was steep, who silenced the body, not to suffer but to listen, because they understood that the loudest voice in the room is not always the wisest. The world might not see their struggle, but the soul does, and the soul rewards silence with clarity, pain with power, sacrifice with awakening. You are not your thoughts, they say. You are the awareness behind them. That is not just poetry, it is reality. You are not your urges, you are not your cravings, you are not your failures or your fears. You are the stillness beneath all of it, the silent mountain unmoved by the weather. And it is only when you dare to stop numbing yourself with noise, with consumption, with approval, that you begin to discover how powerful you actually are. So I tell you this now with absolute certainty. If you can sit with yourself in silence, you can survive anything. If you can master your own impulses, the world can no longer manipulate you. If you can walk away from what feels good temporarily for what is right eternally, you become unstoppable. Because it is not the man who indulges in everything who becomes strong. It is the one who can walk away. It is not the woman who seeks attention from the world, who becomes radiant. It is the one who reconnects with her own inner light. That light was never gone. It was simply buried under noise. And when you clear that noise, when the body goes silent, you will hear it. That still, calm voice that says, keep going. You are exactly where you need to be. Everything you seek is already inside you. Some of you have been running your entire lives from silence, from discomfort, from your own shadow. But the truth is, what you fear facing is the very doorway to your freedom. On the other side of silence is not emptiness. On the other side of discipline is not loss. There is clarity. There is healing. There is strength that the world cannot offer you because it does not come from the world. It comes from within. Muhammad Ali once said, I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. That is the spirit of discipline, of abstinence, of saying no to temporary pleasure for eternal purpose. Bruce Lee said, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. But how do you know what is your own unless you first remove all that was planted in you without your consent? The answer lies in silence. The answer lies in the sacred pause, in the body going quiet so the soul can rise. Steve Jobs once said, your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. And you, listening to this now, ask yourself, whose life have you been living? Have you been led by your inner compass or dragged by outer noise? Every breath you take in stillness is a step back to your authentic path. It takes nothing to follow the crowd. It takes everything to sit with yourself and listen. It takes everything to look into the mirror of silence and ask, who am I without the noise? But that question is the beginning of awakening. You don't need more motivation. You need more connection, not to the world, but to your soul. You don't need another hack, another product, another promise. You need stillness. You need the courage to be with yourself, to sit in silence long enough that the noise finally fades and what rises is not who the world told you to be, but who you truly are. Because when the body goes silent, the soul doesn't whisper. The soul speaks. And when it does, you will never live the same again. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Because in abstinence, you do not become less, you become whole.